Alright guys, today we're going to be talking about two handguns from a similar walk of life and which one is better. We're talking about two retro combat handguns that have extensive records serving with multiple militaries, multiple special forces, and talk about which one that I think is the best. So on you guys' right here, we have the H&K USP 45 and of course a very venerable gun, very awesome handgun, but we'll discuss that a little bit. And we have the extremely well-proven SIG P226. Now this is a Legion model, so this one's slightly upgraded. Hopefully that comes out for y'all. But this one's slightly upgraded, but both of these have a few characteristics in common that I think make this comparison interesting. The first off is that both of them are double action, single action, and hammer fired consequently. So what this means is that you have a single action pull like this and a double action pull. There's also a decocker on both of them. Now for the P226, there's only a decocker, and you can set that mode up similarly on the H&K USPs. Now like I said, this is a 45, but even the USP 9 functions very similar to this, but of course you have a single action right there, double action right there, and of course your decocker. Now like I said, this one does also have a safety function, so it has a safety up, and then if you press all the way down, it's a decocker. So it has a little bit more multi-function to it, and of course this one's in 45 ACP as opposed to the 9mm. But the other similarities that these handguns serve or have is the fact that they are both functionally and fundamentally designed to be military contract firearms. Now, I'm not sure if there were really huge contracts at the time, but both of these handguns were designed around the same time to meet, once again, military service, and they were accepted. Once again, the USP, I believe it was the USP 9, was accepted by the Bundeswehr, which are, of course, the German military. So this did see adoption with the German military because it was made in Germany. And of course, the SIG P226 has been adopted by a myriad of different police agencies, military. Most famously, I think, famous at least for me, is of course this was adopted by the Navy SEALs, and it was their Mark 24, I believe it was. So this is very much a well-proven handgun, and of course the one that was accepted by the SEALs, I believe, had a little bit longer slide to it, but it's functionally still a 9mm P226 just like this. So let's get into what I think of these two. So let's first say a little bit objective before we go subjective. Of course, this is a 15 round handgun with stock capacity. Now modern mags, you can get aftermarket mags that bump it up to 18 rounds in the same rough size, but your stock out of box is 15 rounds plus one in the chamber of 9mm. Now if we talk about the USP 45, it is 12 rounds of 45 ACP. The USP 9 is 15 rounds as well, so comparable in capacity, but the 45 is just different because it's a bigger bullet. So I'm going to give this one a draw. Now overall size on these two is pretty similar. Once again, the 45 is going to be a little bit bigger because it's just a little bit bigger handgun all around, but you can see that roughly about the same size, and they're roughly full-sized handguns. I would say that these are maybe just a skosh under full size, because if you compare them to something like a 1911, like a government 5-inch, these guys are going to be a little bit less than that. I believe these are like 4.5-ish inch barrels. So, pushing full size, but not quite full size just yet. So other than that, you have your controls, which the HK of course has the ambidextrous paddle magazine release, which take it for what it's worth. There's definitely a reason why a lot of handgun companies don't use it. It takes a minute to train to, and I will say that I do think that the magazine, or sorry, slide catch slash slide lock, slide release, slide lock is much better on the H&K USP, whereas on the P226 I think it's just a little bit too recessed. But I will say, I will give, I think, overall ergonomic edge to the P226 because it is very fundamentally designed to be used as a handgun. And what I mean by this is a lot of handguns, especially things like 1911s, when you look at the, like let's just go back to the slide release, slide lock, very much you have to use your support hand. In fact, that's actually kind of the doctrine of the 1911. And so for me, never really a huge fan of that because it's called a handgun, not a hands gun. And so while it is recommended to shoot with two hands, of course, in the event of whatever emergency, being able to operate your handgun, just single-handedly, with one hand, being able to hit all your functions is very important and very valuable to at least me. So I will say something that I do think is pretty cool is that everything is very pushed very far back. So you can notice, I think the H&K USP is very similar to most conventional handguns, but you have your slide release, slide lock kind of, more forward of where your thumb would naturally sit, whereas everything on the P226 is very far back, and including your magazine release. And so everything is very comfortable to hit with just your thumb, so without requiring you to break your grip. So I will give the P226 the edge ergonomically. Now, as far as it goes for features, I think this is, or feature/accessories. Now, as far as features and accessories go, I think that once again the P226 does get the edge here because the USP still, for whatever reason, defiantly uses its own proprietary rail system. Even though their rail system has not been supported for a very long time, they still use it. So you have to get something like a G&G or GG&G like rail adapter is like the most low profile one, and that's what this guy is wearing to actually like adapt this to other lights and lasers and stuff. And on top of that too, there's no real updating to this gun, even though these guns are still being made. New P226s, this one's maybe not the best candidate or example, but modern P226s that are coming out today are cut for red dots and stuff like that. And once again, you can send this slide off to be milled for a red dot. You can do these things, but the fact that this thing is coming out the factory or out the box or out the factory with proprietary rail system that is antiquated and outdated, that no one's really offering any compatibility for, the fact that it's not cut for red dots, the fact that this gun is just defiantly old is a little bit frustrating. So take that for what it's worth, but I will say that as far as like actual out of the box usability goes, the P226 is definitely where it's at. Now, as far as shooting goes, shooting I think is arguably probably one of the most important things. And of course, like that cool factor, I will say the P226 for me definitely loses in shootability, and it comes down a lot to a few things for me, but the first is the double action trigger pull. So the double action trigger pull is very hard to showcase in this, but it's very, it's actually pretty light, which is enjoyable, but there's really no crisp definition of borders. So it's kind of, once again, hard for me to actually show what I mean here. But when you pull the double action trigger of the USP, there's a very clear cocking stage, and then you hit this really solid wall right before you break. And so you really know, like I know that if I pull the trigger any further than this, the gun's going to go bang. Like it's an absolute surety. Whereas with the P226, there's just a lot of travel, and then it just boom, like it just shoots. And so there's a ton of travel. And so when you're actually working your reps, and it's very hard to get comfortable with the double action in the P226. And the reason why I say this, and the reason why especially it's important with the P226, even over the USP, is that if you're going to carry this gun as you should with a round in the chamber, the only, like there's no external safety on this. The only safety you have really is decocking your handgun, if I can do it, and then having that long double action trigger pull be your safety. And so that's why I really dislike the double action trigger pull for the 226, is that it's your only safety, your only option if you want to carry with one in the chamber, but it's not a really definitive, really defined wall right before you break that trigger. So anyways, that is one of the things I really dislike about it. Also, for whatever reason, I'm not exactly sure why, the recoil impulse to me on the HK USP just feels really good. It's hard to describe exactly. Obviously, you know, 45 versus 9mm. The 9mm is going to have functionally less recoil, but the recoil impulse of the USP 45 to me feels very manageable, especially for 45. Shooting this back to back with a 1911 and with a Glock 21, this was easily the least recoiling 45 that I shot, you know, back to back. Could there be others? Potentially. It's been a minute since I've shot the FNX 45, so I can't quite remember how soft shooting that is for a 45, but the HK USP 45 is incredibly soft shooting from my perspective. So once again, the big wins for me are the fact that it has a very crisp wall, like before you actually know, because like I said, like, you know that you're right up against that wall before the trigger breaks. There's no like second guessing that, and for me, I really enjoy that fact. The other part that is nice is reset. Reset for both of these guns honestly kind of sucks, because anytime you have a double action system for a handgun, inherently the double action system just makes the trigger just garbage. But as far as bad triggers go, the HK is what I would consider the least bad of bad triggers. So the USP 45, I think, definitely wins as far as shootability and me wanting to shoot, because even this thing, like I said, all double action, single action triggers suck, but the HK sucks the least. So for me, I don't know. I really do like the USP for that regard. In addition to, and once again, this is going to be another subjective thing, I do like the grip angle and the overall texturing and the fit and feel for the USP 45 a lot more. It feels more natural in hand. It feels more pointable for me, and that is something that I don't have as much with the P226. Now, both of these, unfortunately, and kind of characteristically of their age, are kind of high bore axis handguns. Certainly not like, you know, the CZP-10C or something to that effect, where it's, you know, a lower barrel. So both have a decent amount of muzzle flip. However, like I said, the HK for me feels really controllable, and just overall feels very squared away. And once again, not trying to be like a SIG, or not SIG, but a HK master race type person. It's just functionally, I think the USP really works quite well for me. Now, like I said, the SIG P226 is certainly a very decent handgun, but I don't know, for me, it feels not quite there for me. And like I said, I think it's primarily just due to that double action trigger. Almost every time I index and push out with this handgun, I know the shot's gonna break, but I don't know quite when it's gonna break, and it always feels just a little too early for me, in my opinion. It always, when I'm pushing out the handgun, always feels like it breaks just a little bit too early. And once again, I begin to kind of like anticipate that. So I've been like, you know, it's gonna go off, it's gonna go off, it's gonna go off as I like index and push the gun out. But I really don't love that fact. So yeah, kind of not my favorite part about that. But anyways, concluding thoughts, I think that both of these handguns are pretty good. Once again, obviously their service records are very much proof of the fact that they are both well liked and well regarded. The HK, much like most German products, is a quirky handgun. You know, you have your weird paddle, you know, magazine release, which I do kind of have to break my shooting grip. I say kind of because I'm not fully, like, if I had to pull the trigger, I could still get to it, you know, but it definitely takes a little bit to get accustomed to. But being that this is one of the more controllable shooting 45s out there, and once again, just a very smooth recoiling handgun for what it is, I would be really hard pressed to not recommend the HK USP 45, especially the 45 flavor. Now, of course, we'll make a more in-depth video on the 45 and actually like break down some of the things that give this gun the edge over other 45s, but I wanted to stay pretty objective to comparing these two handguns, and not just say that the, you know, USP is just better because it can handle 45 super out of the box. Like, that's cool, but you know, this is a 9mm versus a 45. So obviously ballistic superiority in, you know, hot rod ammo like a 45 Super is going to be much greater than, you know, just a standard 115 grain 9mm bullet. So anyways, notwithstanding that, this gun is really cool, and definitely I would highly recommend, if you haven't checked out a USP already and you want to dip your toes into some HK superiority, the USP is really cool. I do personally think that it wins in the competition, partly because it is a very durable handgun, and to me it just shoots better, especially the trigger's far more dialed in, and the P226 is cool, but for me it's kind of chunky, kind of heavy, and it does not help that it has a full metal body, which some people might actually like, that it has a full, you know, metal frame as opposed to the polymer construction of the USP. But anyways, guys, hopefully you enjoyed this video. As always, God bless, and I'm out.